Isabella Martinez had dreamed of her perfect wedding day since childhood. The flowing white dress, the romantic ceremony, the peaceful celebration with family and friends in the beautiful countryside vineyard. At 26, she looked like every bride's magazine cover, delicate, radiant, and completely focused on love and happiness. The 12 heavily armed men who crashed through the chapel doors during her vows had clearly chosen their target well. A wealthy family celebration full of defenseless civilians in formal, where isolated from police response, with a helpless bride who would make the perfect leverage for their demands. But what they didn't know was that Isabella's white dress concealed scars from 3 tours in Afghanistan, and her bouquet was positioned for optimal weapon access. Because sometimes the most dangerous warriors are the ones who look most innocent, and the most lethal response comes from someone defending what they love most. The morning of Isabella Martinez's wedding had dawned with a kind of perfect California sunshine that seemed designed specifically for fairy tale celebrations. The rolling hills vineyard sat nestled in wine country, 45 minutes from the nearest town, and surrounded by acres of pristine countryside that provided both stunning scenery and complete privacy for the intimate ceremony Isabella had envisioned since ending her military career 8 months earlier. Isabella stood before the antique mirror in the vineyard's bridal suite, adjusting the delicate lace sleeves of her grandmother's wedding dress that had been altered to fit her petite 5 feet 3 inches, framed perfectly. The dress was everything she had dreamed of: vintage ivory silk with hand-sewn pearls, flowing cathedral train, and intricate beadwork that caught the morning light like scattered diamonds. She looked exactly like the romantic bride she had always wanted to be, but the woman in the mirror carried secrets that no wedding dress could completely conceal. Beneath the delicate lace, barely visible scars traced patterns across her arms and shoulders, souvenirs from improvised explosive devices, shrapnel wounds, and close-quarters combat that had earned her the call sign Ghost during 5 years with the 75th Ranger Regiment's elite reconnaissance units. Major Isabella Martinez had officially retired from active duty 6 months before her wedding date, but retirement from special operations didn't erase training that had become instinct or eliminate threat assessment that occurred automatically regardless of the situation. Even on her wedding day, Isabella's mind cataloged defensive positions, exit routes, and tactical considerations that most brides never needed to contemplate. The vineyard's location had been chosen for romantic reasons, but Isabella's military experience had noted additional advantages that she hadn't mentioned to her fiancé, David. The remote setting provided natural security through isolation. The chapel's elevated position offered commanding views of approach routes, and the building's stone construction will provide cover if defensive positions became necessary. Not that Isabella expected to need such considerations on the happiest day of her civilian life. David Chin was everything Isabella had never thought she wanted: a successful software engineer whose biggest challenges involved coding problems in client meetings rather than life-or-death tactical situations. He was gentle, intelligent, and completely removed from the world of military operations that had defined Isabella's adult life until she decided to pursue a normal relationship with someone who could offer stability rather than danger. David knew about Isabella's military service, but his understanding was limited to the sanitized version she had provided. "I served overseas and decided I was ready for civilian life." He had never pressed for details about her deployments, and Isabella had never offered information about classified operations, special forces training, or the kind of combat experience that would have worried any civilian partner who truly understood what she had done during her military career. The wedding guest list reflected Isabella's successful transition to civilian life. David's family and business associates, Isabella's new colleagues in the art gallery where she found satisfying work, and carefully selected friends who knew her only as a charming, creative woman who had brought happiness to David's previously bachelor lifestyle. None of them suspected that the bride exchanging vows today had eliminated high-value targets in 7 different countries. The chapel itself was a masterpiece of romantic wedding planning. Built in the 1920s, it featured stained glass windows, hand-carved wooden pews, an altar decorated with white roses and baby's breath that created the perfect atmosphere for the intimate ceremony Isabella had envisioned. 43 guests would witness their vows in a setting that looked like something from a fairy tale romance novel. Father Miguel Santos had driven from San Francisco to perform the ceremony, having known Isabella's family since her childhood. He represented continuity between her past and future, Someone who remembered the little girl who had dreamed of her wedding day long before military service changed her perspective on life, death, and what constituted real threats versus imaginary concerns. The ceremony began at 2 p.m. with Isabella's processional down the chapel aisle, accompanied by classical guitar music that David had selected because it reminded him of their first date. Isabella carried a bouquet of white roses and orange blossoms, walking with the graceful confidence that had attracted David's attention when they first met at a gallery opening 18 months earlier. David waited at the altar with an expression that mixed joy, nervousness, and the kind of genuine love that had convinced Isabella to risk opening her heart to someone who represented everything her dangerous career had taught her to protect. He looked perfect in his classic black tuxedo, standing beside his best man Michael and groomsman who had been his friends since college, and Isabella's maid of honor was her sister Carmen, the only family member who had even limited knowledge of Isabella's military background. Carmen knew that Isabella had served in Afghanistan, but like David, she understood this as honorable service rather than elite special operations that had involved classified missions behind enemy lines. The ceremony proceeded with traditional Catholic wedding rituals that Isabella had requested specifically because they represented stability, continuity, and connection to family traditions that contrasted sharply with the unconventional life she was leaving behind. Father Santos' voice carried the authority and warmth that made his words feel like blessings rather than mere ceremonial obligations. Dearly beloved, we are gathered here today to witness the union of Isabella and David in holy matrimony. Father Santos began, his voice echoing to the chapel with a kind of profound dignity that made even secular guests feel they were witnessing something sacred rather than simply attending a social celebration. Isabella focused on David's face, letting the peaceful atmosphere wash over her as she prepared to exchange vows that would officially mark her transformation from military operative to devoted wife. This was exactly the kind of normal, beautiful moment she had dreamed of during long deployments in hostile territories, where weddings seemed like impossible luxury rather than attainable reality. The chapel doors exploded inward at 2:47 p.m., 17 minutes into the ceremony, with a kind of violent force that immediately identified this as tactical breach rather than accidental disruption. 12 armed men in black tactical gear flooded through the entrance, weapons raised, moving with military precision that suggested professional training rather than amateur criminal activity. Isabella's threat assessment was instantaneous and automatic. 12 hostiles, mixed small arms including automatic weapons, tactical movement suggesting special operations background, coordinated breach indicating extensive planning and surveillance. Primary objective appeared to be kidnapping rather than mass casualties based on their controlled fire discipline, and focus on crowd control rather than immediate elimination threats. The lead gunman was approximately 6 feet 2 inches, muscular build, carrying an M4 carbine with professional modifications, movement patterns suggesting military background, possibly special forces or elite infantry. His commands were delivered with authority that indicated leadership experience rather than criminal desperation. "Nobody fucking move," the leader shouted, his weapons sweeping across terrified wedding guests who were diving behind pews and screaming in panic. "This is about money, not murder. Cooperate, and everyone goes home." Isabella remained standing at the altar, her training preventing the panic response that would be natural for any civilian bride faced with armed intruders. Her position bouquet wasn't accidental. Beneath the roses was a Glock 19 that she had carried despite David's objections about weapons at their wedding. Old habits from special operations had proven more difficult to abandon than anticipated. "You!" The leader pointed his rifle directly at Isabella. "Pretty little bride, you're coming with us. Daddy's money buys your freedom, and everyone else gets to live happily ever after." Isabella's mind calculated tactical options while maintaining the terrified bride facade that would keep the gunman underestimating her capabilities. 12 armed hostiles against 43 civilian guests plus one concealed operator represented challenging odds, but not impossible under current conditions. The chapel stone construction would limit collateral damage, and defensive positions were available if she could initiate contact on her terms rather than theirs. David stepped forward with a kind of protective instinct that made Isabella love him, but also mark him as immediate target for hostiles who needed to establish dominance through demonstration of consequences for resistance. "Please, don't hurt her. We'll give you whatever you want." The leader's response was predictable. striking David across the face with his rifle, but sending Isabella's fiancé crashing into the altar with blood streaming from a split lip. "Shut up, hero. Nobody asked for volunteers." Isabella's emotional response to seeing David hurt triggered tactical decision-making that overrode her cover identity. Protecting David and the wedding guests required revealing capabilities that would permanently end her civilian life. But watching a man she loved being brutalized made the choice simple and immediate. "Please don't hurt him," Isabella said, allowing her voice to carry the tremor of fear that the gunman expected while positioning herself for weapon access and calculating angles of fire that would minimize risk to civilians. "I'll come with you. Just don't hurt anyone else." The leader approached Isabella with obvious satisfaction at finding such a cooperative target. His tactical assessment had been correct. A wealthy family wedded with defenseless civilians led by a delicate bride who would do anything to protect innocent lives. He had no way of knowing that his target assessment was fatally flawed. "Smart girl. You're going to walk out of here like a good little bride, and Daddy's going to pay us $20 million for your safe return." He reached for Isabella's arm with the confidence of someone who had successfully completed similar operations against helpless victims. Isabella's response was faster than human reaction time should have allowed. Her right hand retrieved the Glock from her bouquet, while her left hand trapped the leader's rifle, preventing him from bringing it to bear. Her first shot entered his head at contact distance before he could process what was happening. The chapel erupted in chaos as Isabella's tactical training took complete control. She used the leader's body as cover while engaging the second gunman, her shots finding center mass with precision that demonstrated years of close-quarters combat training. Her wedding dress was already soaked with blood, but her movement remained fluid and professional. Everyone stayed down. Isabella shouted to the wedding guests while advancing on the third gunman. "Do not look up until I tell you it's safe." The remaining gunmen were realizing that their easy target had somehow become an active threat, but their tactical response was slowed by confusion about what was happening. They had prepared for crowd control and victim management, not combat against a skilled operator who was systematically eliminating their team. Isabella's fourth and fifth targets fell precision, shooting that reflected thousands of hours of training in urban combat environments. Her grandmother's wedding dress was becoming increasingly damaged as she moved through defensive positions, but her focus remained entirely on threat elimination and civilian protection. The sixth gunman managed to return fire, his round striking stone near Isabella's position, but missing their target as she used cover and concealment with expertise that only came from real combat experience. His muzzle flash gave away his position, and Isabella's response was immediate and lethal. "Dave, are you hit?" Isabella called out while reloading behind a stone pillar, her voice carrying tactical authority that was completely different from the gentle tone David knew from their relationship. "I'm okay. Isabella, what the hell is happening?" David's response carried shock and confusion rather than fear, as if he was having trouble processing the transformation of his bride into a combat operative who was engaging multiple armed hostiles with professional competence. The seventh and eighth gunmen attempted coordinated movement to flank Isabella's position, but their tactical skill was inferior to her training and experience. She anticipated their approach and eliminated both targets with rapid precision fire that demonstrated mastery of close-quarters combat techniques. Isabella's ninth target attempted to use wedding guests as human shields, grabbing Carmen and pressing a pistol to her head while demanding Isabella surrender. His tactical error was assuming that taking hostages would force Isabella to stand down rather than adapt her engagement strategy. "Let her go and I won't kill you slowly," Isabella said calmly, her weapon trained on the gunman with absolute steadiness despite the tactical complexity of the hostage situation. The gunman's response revealed his amateur status compared to Isabella's professional training. "Drop your weapon or I'll blow her brains out." Isabella's shot removed the threat, while ensuring Carmen's safety with precision that required perfect understanding of ballistics, angles, and risk assessment under extreme pressure. Carmen collapsed unharmed but traumatized, while Isabella continued engaging remaining targets. The 10th and 11th gunmen realized they were facing someone far beyond their capabilities and attempted tactical withdrawal, but Isabella had positioned herself to control the chapel's exits. Her pursuit and elimination of fleeing targets demonstrated tactical skills that exceeded anything civilian law enforcement typically encountered. The final gunman surrendered, dropping his weapon and raising his hands while pleading for mercy from someone he now understood was far more dangerous than any bride should be. Isabella secured his weapon and restraints while maintaining overwatch on the entire chapel. "Everyone can look up now," Isabella announced. Her voice returned to something closer to normal as immediate threats were eliminated. "The danger is over." The wedding guests slowly emerged from cover, their expressions mixing relief with complete bewilderment at what they had witnessed. The delicate bride they had watched exchange vows had transformed into a combat operative who had eliminated 11 armed assailants with professional efficiency that suggested extensive military training. David approached Isabella carefully, his face reflecting shock and amazement at discovering capabilities he had never suspected. "Isabella, who are you? What just happened?" Isabella looked at her wedding dress, now damaged beyond repair and soaked with blood from combat that had permanently ended her civilian identity. Her bouquet was scattered across the chapel floor, mixed with brass casings and the aftermath of violence that had shattered her peaceful wedding ceremony. "I'm Major Isabella Martinez, 75th Ranger Regiment, recently retired," Isabella said quietly, finally revealing the truth that she had hidden throughout their relationship. "And I just protected everyone I care about using skills I hoped I'd never need again." The chapel fell silent as wedding guests processed a revelation that their gentle, artistic friend was actually an elite military operative whose capabilities extended far beyond anything they had imagined. Father Santos approached cautiously, his expression mixing concern with newfound respect for someone he thought he had known since childhood. "Isabella, are you injured?" Father Santos asked, noting blood on her dress without being certain whether it belonged to her or the eliminated threats. "I'm fine, Father. The blood isn't mine," Isabella replied, conducting tactical assessment of the chapel while waiting for law enforcement response that would require extensive explanation of the incident and her background. David stared at the woman he had planned to marry, trying to reconcile the gentle partner he loved with the warrior he had just witnessed eliminate multiple armed threats with deadly efficiency. "Isabella, why didn't you tell me? About your real military service?" Isabella's response reflected the complexity of transitioning from classified operations to civilian relationships, where honesty required revealing information that most people couldn't understand or accept. "David, I wanted to leave that life behind. I thought I could be just Isabella Martinez, art gallery employee, instead of Major Martinez, special operations." The sound of approaching sirens indicated that law enforcement had been alerted to the incident, probably by vineyard staff who had heard gunfire and called for assistance. Isabella would need to provide extensive explanation to investigators who would struggle to understand how a bride had single-handedly eliminated 11 armed assailants. Carmen approached her sister with obvious amazement, mixed with growing understanding of why Isabella had always seemed different from other people. "Isabella, you saved all of us, but I had no idea you were capable of this." Isabella surveyed the chapel where her perfect wedding had become a combat zone, recognizing that her attempt to live a normal civilian life had been permanently ended by circumstances that required her to reveal capabilities she had hoped to keep hidden forever. "Carmen, I've been trained to do whatever is necessary to protect innocent people. Today, that training saved lives, but it also ended the peaceful life I was trying to build," Isabella said, acknowledging the cost of revealing her true identity to everyone she had hoped to know only as a civilian. David took Isabella's hand carefully, as if approaching someone he was just beginning to understand rather than the woman he had planned to marry. "Isabella, I love you regardless of your background, but I need to understand who you really are and what this means for our future." Isabella looked at David with love mixed with sadness for the simple relationship that had been lost when violence forced her to reveal capabilities that would change how everyone treated her. "David, I'm the same person you fell in love with, but I'm also someone who has done things and seen things that most people can't understand or accept." The first police officers entered the chapel with weapons drawn, expecting to find active threats rather than a bride calmly explaining incident details to traumatize wedding guests. Their confusion was understandable. Crime scenes didn't typically feature elegant wedding celebrations mixed with tactical combat aftermath. "Ma'am, are you injured? What happened here?" the lead officer asked, his training struggling to process a situation where someone in a wedding dress appeared to be the victor rather than victim in a multiple homicide incident. Isabella raised her hands to show she was unarmed, her military training automatically adapting to law enforcement protocols that would govern investigation of the incident. Officer, I'm retired military, and I defended wedding guests against armed intruders who threatened to kidnap me for ransom. The police response will require hours of interviews, evidence collection, and coordination with federal authorities who would investigate the identities and motives of the eliminated threats. Isabella's military background would eventually expedite the investigation, but the process would be extensive and complicated. Over the following weeks, investigation revealed that the gunman had been part of a criminal organization specializing in kidnapping wealthy targets for ransom. They had selected Isabella based on surveillance indicating a high-value target from an affluent family, isolated location, and what appeared to be defenseless civilian circumstances. The criminal organization had conducted extensive planning, including surveillance of the wedding location, guest list analysis, and tactical preparation for what they expected to be routine kidnapping operation against helpless victims. Their intelligence had failed to identify Isabella's military background or capabilities that made her the worst possible target for their operation. Isabella's actions were ruled justified self-defense and defense of others by investigators who eventually gained access to her classified military records. Her response had been proportional to the threat and executed with precision that prevented civilian casualties while eliminating hostile forces that represented clear and present danger. David ultimately decided that he could accept Isabella's background and capabilities, but their relationship required complete honesty and adjustment to realities that hadn't been part of his expectations for married life. The wedding was rescheduled for 6 months later, with security arrangements that reflected Isabella's realistic assessment of potential threats. Isabella never returned to her civilian identity as art gallery employee. Word of her capabilities spread through networks that valued such skills, leading to consultation opportunities in personal security and threat assessment that allowed her to use her training for legitimate purposes while maintaining the relationship with David that had survived revelation of her true background. The Vineyard Chapel was repaired and restored, becoming something of a legend among law enforcement and military personnel who heard the story of the bride who had single-handedly eliminated 12 armed assailants while protecting her wedding guests. The chapel's management added discreet security measures that reflected realistic threat assessment rather than romantic assumptions about wedding day safety. Father Santos performed Isabella and David's rescheduled ceremony with new understanding of both participants and additional security that ensured peaceful celebration. His wedding sermon included references to the various forms that love and protection could take, acknowledging that sometimes the greatest expressions of care required capabilities that challenged conventional expectations. That Isabella's story became case study material for law enforcement and military training programs that examined civilian defensive situations and the importance of not making assumptions about potential threats or assets based on appearances. The bride who had looked most helpless had proven most dangerous when protecting people she loved. The wedding dress was never repaired. Isabella kept it as a reminder that some identities couldn't be permanently abandoned and that training designed to protect innocent lives would always be more important than maintaining comfortable illusions about safety and normalcy in a dangerous world. David learned that love sometimes meant accepting capabilities and backgrounds that challenged his comfortable assumptions about the people closest to him. Isabella learned that some skills couldn't be retired and that protecting the people she loved would always take priority over maintaining civilian identities that provided comfort but not security. The criminal organization that had targeted Isabella's wedding never recovered from the loss of 12 operatives in what should have been routine kidnapping operation. Word spread through criminal networks that some targets were far more dangerous than they appeared, and wedding venues became regarded as potentially high-risk operations rather than easy scores. Isabella Martinez proved that the most dangerous assumptions are often the ones that seem most reasonable based on appearances, and that the most effective protection sometimes comes from sources that nobody would expect until circumstances require capabilities that challenge every assumption about what helpless people look like. The bride who had dreamed of a perfect fairy tale wedding discovered that sometimes the most important vows are the ones you make to protect the people you love, regardless of what that protection requires or costs in terms of the peaceful life you had hoped to build. Isabella's wedding day became legend not because of romantic celebration, but because it demonstrated that love and protection sometimes require capabilities that don't match conventional expectations. about what brides should know how to do when faced with 12 armed men who made the mistake of crashing the wrong wedding.